Another person I forgot to thank, Carol, is she's a pretty big deal in our community, and I know it sounds dumb, but she don't like to hear it, but to take her time to put together presentations and give back is a pretty big deal to me. So I appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Love you.
My pleasure. All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name's Carol. I am the, yeah, you got that, the Human-Centered Design Practice Lead at 1904 Labs. And thank you, Chris, and is Martha here?
I'm right here. I just showed up.
You just showed up for inviting me to do this. It's really a pleasure to see all these great people. This community has grown tremendously since I first joined it, and it's wonderful to see such cooperation and participation. The title of this presentation got me a little nervous. Advanced UX, ambiguous UX skills, and using them to advance your career in the profession. There was a subtitle about skills to achieve greatness, so there we are. I make no promises, I'm sorry. In the spirit of Stephen Covey, are you guys familiar with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Okay, yeah, I know some of you. So we're going to begin with the end in mind, but actually we're going to begin with asking you who you guys are, because I know a lot of you. But I just, by a show of hands, how many of you are UX practitioners? Almost everybody. That was an easy one. How many of you mostly do design? Mostly do research? What are the rest of you doing all day? What's going on over here? Say what?
There was free wine.
Free wine. Free wine? Free wine? Service design. How many of you are in service design? Any? Thank you, Jake. How many of you work with development teams, directly with development teams? Okay, so there we go. I knew there was going to be one that we got. Okay, so my goal tonight is twofold. I want to get to know you a little bit more. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of, it's a small community here. I think there's maybe 1 degree of separation between me and all of you, and you and all of each other. So I want to learn more about who you are and what you're doing. And I've had the pleasure of being mentored by a lot of great people. So my goal, again, is twofold. I want to do a little mentoring maybe and be mentored by all of you. So we'll have some time to talk this evening about what you all are doing and some of the things you're thinking about when I talk about some of this stuff here. So I'll start with a little bit of who I am and where I came from. As I said, many of you and I have like 1 degree of separation or none. How many of you have I worked with directly before? So a bunch. That's cool. I'll start a little bit about my background. I have a background in psychology, educational psychology and computer applications to education. It was a handy thing to study in 1992 because around that time the field was starting to understand that psychology and computers kind of went together hand in hand. This was sort of the dawn of home computing and personal computing, and we started realizing that people are using computers, not just like really smart people in big cold rooms who had degrees in computer science, but everybody was using computers. So there had to be a lot more knowledge about what the average interactions with people and computers were. So that, that was just good luck that I segued into that field. My title at the time was usability engineer. As you all know, our titles change periodically in this field. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. One of the other things that IBM, when I started at IBM, they realized a little bit after I got there that there was actually a difference between people who like to do design and are good at design and people who like to do research. And so we actually split our department into 2. That was one of the first times that happened in the industry. And I got to manage the usability department, which was basically the researchers. We would call them user researchers now. Again, my timing was really good there. Then IBM changed again. They changed a lot over the years. Around 1995, 96, we shut down the lab where I was working, and I went to work as a trainer in user-centered design. So we changed the title again to user-centered design, and it was really cool at the time because user-centered design was first becoming really apparent in the community. We were working with companies like Microsoft and Apple, and remember Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, and Sun, and companies like that to actually define what is this process called user-centered design, right? we were constantly trying to move upstream in the development cycle. We were tired of testing at the end and finding out nobody was paying attention to us, right? So we kept moving upstream. And I became a trainer. And again, that was really good luck for me because we didn't know what we were teaching yet. We were kind of trying to stay one step ahead of our students. We really didn't understand the process end to end. We were learning about it. We were discovering it. And so in training, we actually were developing the process as we went. So that was a really good opportunity. There was a term that we started using around this time, and it was called the TUE. Anybody want to guess what TUE stands for?
Technical user.
Getting 1 out of 2. And okay. And this refers to what we were designing. It's another hint. Anyone? Experience with an E? Yes. It was the total user experience. That was actually the first time in the industry the term user experience was used in writing and publications. And we were talking about it back in 1995. We just weren't cool enough to make it X. It was TUE. But anyhow, so that was around 1995. Around 1998, more changes were going on. Mostly, I had a kid and decided, you know, I didn't want to be running around the country on planes all the time for IBM, so I quit. And I started my own company. I did that for a couple of years. I'm sorry, before that, I started working in global services as a consultant. And it was after that that I had the kid. And the nice thing about global services was IBM's consulting and user-centered design. They taught me how to be a consultant, so I said I'm going to go off and do that on my own. Thank you very much for, you know, giving me all those great skills. So I was independent from 1998 to 2006. It was around the time I moved to St. Louis. And that's when I got to meet a lot of the people in this room. Around that time, a company named Proficient, and raise your hand if you've ever worked for Proficient. I'm sure there's a bunch. Had a role as a director of human-centered design consulting. So I was lucky enough to fall into that role and worked with a lot of the folks in this room, which was really cool because a lot of those folks went on and are doing great things on their own and still here in St. Louis community. Finally, to fast forward, I went back on my own in 2009 all the way to 2017. And today I took a position in September as the practice lead of human-centered design consulting at 1904 Labs. So long story, yeah, there you go. And how many of you work for 1904 Labs? All right. So small community. All right, so let's talk a little bit about ambiguous things. What are advanced or ambiguous UX skills? You know, I saw this title and I was thinking, what were some of the ambiguous things I remember or I've come across or I've seen? Well, the definition of ambiguous meaning open to more than one interpretation or two meanings, right? So how many of you have seen this figure? Yes, how many of you have not? We're going to embarrass you. Okay. All right, what do you see there? An old lady? You see that?
Young lady.
A young lady? This is what cognitive psychologists call an ambiguous figure, right? You can actually see two things in it. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I'm sorry. You can beat me up later. But if you look at this a certain way, you'll see a young woman looking off into the distance, or an old lady. Here's her nose, here's her mouth. These are called ambiguous figures. Sometimes they're referred to as optical illusions. Here's another one you've probably seen a lot of, right? What do you see here? Faces and a vase, right? Here's the vase, the white is the vase. And it uses all these cognitive gestalt principles of figuring ground to make ambiguous impressions. Another thing that's ambiguous that we come across in our day-to-day life is language, which is, you know, sometimes it's not good to be too ambiguous with your language. Sometimes, though, it's really funny because you've all heard this joke, right? What does she say? You're a cab, right? So that's one example of how ambiguity can actually be fun. Here's another one. What do you guys think this is? Anybody know this expression? So this takes advantage of the fact that in certain languages, especially Romance languages, the subject and the object are reversed than they are in English. So there's a famous expression, throw mama from the train a kiss. As opposed to throw a kiss to mama from the train or something along those lines. So throw mama from the train, a kiss could have tragic consequences. You know, another example of ambiguity that we see every day, you know what this is? Curb cutout. Why is this ambiguous?
There's a drain in it.
And it's raining too, so curb cutouts were actually originally built to help disabled people, folks in wheelchairs, be able to easily navigate up and down curbs. But as it turned out, curb cutouts were really helpful to a lot of other people. Like, what other advantages can you see to a curb cutout even if you're not in a wheelchair? Martha?
Stroller.
A stroller, pushing a stroller, bicycles, scooters, skateboards, right? Say what? If you're blind, so without having to step down. So, say, what was that? Drainage. Somebody else said drainage. So yeah, ambiguity is actually a pretty good thing. So thinking about ambiguity and applying it to UX skills, what are some ambiguous UX skills that we've seen in the past? Well, this is not an uncommon thing that we do every day, right? All of us have to communicate every day. What are some of the common ways that we communicate and engage in communication in our everyday lives at work? So give me some examples. How do you engage in communication? Slack. You talk in person. Some people still do that. That's awesome.
Wireframe.
Call people, phone, wireframe. So visual communication. What other? Go to meetings, right? In-person stand-ups, daily stand-ups. So those are ways that we engage in communication on a day-to-day basis. But as far as an advanced UX skill or an ambiguous or advanced senior UX skill, what we want to be able to do is actually drive communication. And that's kind of taking engaging communications to the next level. I'll give you some examples. One is we can contextualize the things that we do and say to drive communication. So here's an example of a report recommendation that I created. And I'll just read it to you really quick. It's a finding from a usability test, right? And on the welcome screen, the issue that I found was the text said it'll take about 10 minutes to complete the application. In reality, from my observations, it takes at least 15 to 20 minutes. Several participants commented the applications took longer to complete than they expected. And so the recommendation that came out of this was change the estimate to about 15 to 20 minutes. Now, if we wanted to give a contextual spin to this finding, basic reporting, we could do something like this. Not just say that here's the issue, but we can say why this was an issue and what are the ramifications of the issue. So if users' expectations are not met, they'll experience dissatisfaction. Further, they may not allocate enough time to complete the application and lose their work in progress. So it's a little bit more backstory, a little bit more context to the finding. You're helping your consumer. You're driving that conversation to the next level. You're giving them a little bit more background and context. Why is this a good thing to do in our field? Martha.
Because
She's
a lot of the business, they don't understand why it's an issue. They don't know why it's such a big deal.
So they don't know why. You're really teaching. You're helping, you're kind of getting them on board with what you do. There's also a lot of skepticism to what we do. You ever hear this as, well, that's your opinion, right? That's just your opinion. And your opinion, I got an opinion, you got an opinion. Why is yours any better than mine? Well, this gives, best practices, background, research, supporting information that you're saying, look, this is not just my opinion. There's a best practice behind this. There's a rationale behind this finding. And if you continually raise the level of communication by contextualizing it, you're going to get better results over time. Does somebody have a comment or a question? Okay. Here's another example, just another finding here. This was another usability study, and here's the finding. Users were confused by the It's Easy button. Oh. Okay, and here's after I contextualize it. Now, I will caveat this with, I work with a lot of developers, and I will write up a report sometimes, and I'll hand this over, and you know what they say? Too many words. You're using too many words. And I push back because I feel like there's two reasons I use a lot of words. One is that there are times that, yes, thank you, Chris. A lot of times I will do a study, do some research, hand it over, and then the developers will not be working on this feature until maybe months later, right? And they'll call me and they go, oh yeah, now we're pulling into our sprint, right? What was that all about anyhow? I ain't getting any younger, you know. I forget things. They're not paying attention half the time, you know, so to document it is part of the reason to use the words, right? So to memorialize it, to make sure you capture the richness of what you actually found. The other reason is you don't talk to everybody when you're delivering the results of a study, right? You usually only have a couple people, maybe nobody at all. Maybe you're just filing this somewhere and you're hoping that people read it. So you have to give enough background and context for people to understand what you really mean and what your intent is. So, you know, I push back on the too many words thing. I think I like words. Words are pretty good. So another different ambiguous aspect of communication that helps us drive communication is visualization. And I am by no means an expert here, and there are experts here. Eric's going to be talking about this a little bit. We were talking about Dave Gray, who's another great person in terms of visualization. And Chris was smart enough to post this on his Facebook yesterday because he knew I was looking for comic relief. And I love this image here because I love this here. Time spent on data collection and analysis and time spent making the graphics look cool, right? There's an inverse relationship often to how long it takes to make a really nice visualization. But visualization obviously is a very deep discipline. People think visually, and if you can communicate visually, you can drive communication to that next level. Somebody I know put this together. Martha, you want to talk about what this is?
Yeah, we were trying to help the business and developers and everybody come together and align and understand how this system was going to work. And so, you know, added a little bit of Mario Brothers, right? Basically, we created a pipeline, like an actual pipeline, and put in like what's going to happen each stage of the pipeline, how these parts of Tinker Toys were going to be made, and then how in the flow the sticks were going to be put in and create flows for these components. And it just helped everybody understand it at a glance.
Right, and the key to what Martha was talking about is the next topic we're going to be talking about, which is visualization is really helpful for communicating data and research and design, but it's also helpful in explaining business processes to business people, and that's a really critical part of what we need to do. Another quick example of visualization, I showed you this really boring thing early on. If you think of a journey map though, and of this being my career journey, if you can layer on additional sort of elements to this to give more flavor to what the journey was. So at any point in my career, when was I working on a tactical basis and when was I working in a more strategic role? You could do that. You could talk about your career satisfaction at any stage of the game. So visualization beyond just the words that I love so much. And that takes us to business understanding, that next topic I wanted to talk about, and how we can bring business understanding to the next level using these ambiguous and advanced UX skills. You know, there's another joke about John Dillinger, the bank robber, and they asked Dillinger, why do you rob banks? And what did he say? That's where the money is. Okay, so like it or not, the rationale to pay for user experience and to host that in a company and to spend that money on consulting projects comes from the higher level of the businesses, usually at the C level or at the VP level. They're the folks that we have to influence with regard to explaining what we do and bringing it to the next level of understanding. So typically when we talk about business understanding, we want to consume. We want to understand what the business is all about, what their wants and needs are, what their drivers are. And that helps us understand what we need to deliver to them. But then the next level of business understanding is really shaping business understanding. So not just consuming, but actually giving them the information they need to build the right thing and build it the right way. So we're not really just taking direction, we're shaping their understanding. One way to help shape business understanding is by giving them advice. I have an example from a project that I was working on about 2 years ago. This was for a company that did these really large-scale data migrations, really boring stuff. I almost said the other word, but you're taping this. And so I was, I went in and my goal was to create this blueprint for a product for them that would help them manage their projects, these really complex data migrations with a lot of moving parts and a lot of people working on them. And my challenge was I needed to explain to them why they needed to make this investment. It took me about 6 months to do a lot of the work. I interviewed a lot of people. I gathered all the requirements. I talked to some architects. The price tag for this product was about $500,000, okay? So you're me now, and you have to go tell the CTO why they need to spend $500,000. Give me some ideas about what you might tell them to convince them.
This will save $10 million.
So they could save money. Okay, great. What else?
Increase sales.
Increase sales.
Happier customers.
Happier customers, happier workers, right? So there's a lot of different things you could tell them. I told them why process matters, right? So I was going to build this tool to help them automate their process and make it really refined. So I went and I looked at Forrester research and found out that in a lot of companies that are selling their services, like this company was trying to do, that they had a competitive edge if they could demonstrate they had a really solid process. And what better way to demonstrate a solid process than having a tool that actually automated and guided that process? So that was one argument I made. I also talked about the ROI. So automation saves money because if you automate, you're saving people's times, you're saving, you're reducing errors, you're doing all sorts of things like that. And also I made pictures, right? So I did working prototypes for them because a lot of these C-level folks are talking in meetings all day and they need to see pictures sometimes. So I did some working prototypes for them. They said no for now. That was about 2 years ago. Now, if you were me and you wanted to go back, what would you tell them now? You know how much money you lost in the last 2 years by not doing this? And at least 2 years ago, they understood this argument, they heard the argument, it was in the back of their minds. 2 years later, you could say, yeah, now are you thinking about it a little bit differently? So, stay tuned. We don't know if that's going to work out or not. Give it the old college try. Okay, so in addition to industry advice, another thing that really drives businesses is change management. What do I mean by change management? The nerd that I am, I just cut and paste this stuff from Wikipedia. So change management is a collective term for all approaches to prepare and support individuals, teams, organizations in making organizational change. So if you're a business stakeholder, this is really important to you, right? You're going to build a tool in your organization that you're going to want all of your people to start using, and they're going to stop using their old tool. And you want them on board. You want them really supporting your efforts because otherwise they're not going to be happy. They're going to be grousing. It's going to be a big expense and they're not going to be on board with what you're trying to do. So a project that I worked on recently, they asked us to do a design workshop, which is really cool. How many of you guys have done design workshops with users, co-design workshop? Really cool. Those are great sessions. Everybody's excited about it. But I'm a big process nerd, and before I do a design workshop, there's a few other things I want to do first, right? I want to do like personas maybe, and journey maps, and maybe story maps, and things like that. Process rolls out in a nice sequential way so that you can build on everything you learn. But they were like, nope, go ahead and start with a design workshop. And of course, the other folks like-minded like myself were sitting there grousing and complaining all the time. And until we realized something really important. We tried to put ourselves in the shoes of the business folks we were talking to, the VPs that we were working for. And we realized that they had this goal of change management. It wasn't just getting a design. That was one goal, and that was our goal. But we had to think, well, what's their goal? Their goal is to get their folks on board, to really get people interested and involved. So that was their purpose for doing this design workshop. It wasn't necessarily to get a great design. We could have done that a little bit later on. But they wanted these folks on board really up front in the process. So we wound up doing it. It was very successful because we reshaped the reason for it. And we were able to get a lot of great allies in the company on our behalf. So it really turned out to be successful as it turns out. So I mentioned that I'm a big process nerd, a big process fan. To work in process, one of the first things you have to do is actually follow process. Do you guys follow any sort of defined processes, Six Sigma, or shout out any of the process everybody's doing something different? Say what? Oh, Heart, yep. So the Google Heart, right, things like that. So I really enjoy process, things like user-centered design, and we'll talk a little bit about another process. User experience is still kind of new, so we don't have to create new processes, but it would be helpful if we were innovative as we work in our day-to-day lives to make what we do more efficient and innovate on process. So one way to innovate on process is by integrating current processes together, right? So nothing necessarily new, but taking what we know and optimizing it by bringing it together with another process. So how many of you work in agile environments? Okay. So my current position requires me to help define how we're going to integrate human-centered design into agile. And if anybody's tried to do it, it's really fun and easy, right? Easy. So easy. This is actually the most challenging thing I've done in my career up to this point. It is really difficult for a lot of reasons that I'll have to talk to you guys about it a little bit later on. But this is my current baby that I'm taking care of and trying to define the HCD Agile process. We've got some really good success stories, but we're constantly tweaking it, and we acknowledge it's really hard. But it's not new, but it's an integration of existing processes, and the outcome is new. In addition to integrating processes, we can also innovate on methods. So the methods that we use every day, again, user experience is new, and it's not all set in stone. We can learn and implement new things on a day-to-day basis. So back in 1997, I created this methodology called the 3x3. And basically, the reason I created this was because in 1997, we were under a lot of competitive pressure from agencies for the first time, right? In user experience, up to that point, we weren't really playing in the same field as agencies. But agencies were coming in with these gorgeous mock-ups, right, and showing them to clients. And here we are with our gorgeous research reports and wireframes. And we were getting our lunch eaten every day, right, by folks who could really do beautiful visualizations. So I was trying to understand, well, why are they so successful other than the fact that they do beautiful work? And one methodology that a lot of our competitors had was they would do a 3x3, but they would do it with the client. They would go in, you guys watch Mad Men, right? They go in with the big boards and they pull off the thing and they show and they would show different mock-ups to the client and ask the client, which one do you like the best? And that's the one they would run with. Well, as a user experience person, I wanted to flip that on its head, and it's not the client we have to please, right? It's the user we have to please. And so I created this methodology to create 3 different mock-ups, test them on the first day, refine them on the second, test 2 of them on the third day now that we've narrowed down, refine them on the next day, and finally test them and come out with the one sort of, a little design sprinty, would you say? So that was a little while back, and something else about method innovation. There's not a lot new under the sun. So another methodology, and again, playing off what visual designers were doing, we innovated back in 2011, was visual design preference testing. So again, it's kind of a mashup of, what do you like better, this or this kind of thing, but putting a little bit more structure around it and using a semantic differential scale and large N quantitative research to try to find out, were these visual designs matching the branding objectives of the client. And so, there's a lot of different ways we can innovate. Just a few weeks ago, we came up with what we call the 5 S's. So take your design sprint and shrink it to 90 minutes, and you've got a 5 S's methodology, and it's written up now on the blog on the 1904 Labs website. But those are the 5 S's. I kind of cheated with the 5th one: scope, steal, share, sketch, and splain. And we'll talk about what that is a little bit later on. But it helps us, again, refine a design down in an HCD Agile environment. Just a quick word about method innovation, and this is one of my favorite aspects of what we all do, because there's a lot of creative people here, and you can all, I've learned so much about how you do things differently and how we all kind of optimize what we do. There's like a spectrum of innovation. The most unique methods in our field that are really kind of new, I think like personas, what Alan Cooper did was sort of new. It kind of came out of a very unknown space at the time. Then you've got something that's a little less innovative. It's kind of a mashup of existing, different methodologies, things like using cluster analysis on card sorting, right, something like that, or the 3x3. There's variations of method innovation, but my least favorite type of method innovation, and I'll ask if no one here, please don't do this, is just renaming stuff. You see this all the time. Another IBM story, back in the day when user-centered design, UCD, was catching on, and a lot of the companies in the industry was really on board with it. IBM was like, well, that's not good enough. We need to brand this from an IBM perspective. So they racked their brains coming up with a new name for user-centered design. Basically, the methodologies were almost identical, just little tweaks here and there. But here's what the bright lights there came up with: user engineering. That sounds a little like a cross between Frankenstein, just Westworld. And needless to say, it did not catch on. But so yeah, don't just rename stuff, because there's a lot of really creative ways that you could put together things that you do and optimize it and make it more interesting. And then this is the final one of the skills that I want to talk about that we can really bring to the next level using more advanced UX approaches. Empathy. We know that we are asked to empathize with our users. That's really one of the biggest, most important things we do on a day-to-day basis, right? That's really the key to our empathy. But again, if we want to take a broader view of our role, we want to expand beyond users to humans. Humans being the superset of users. Let's talk about what humans we can empathize with. First of all, technologists, right? I know it's hard, I know it's, but developers are people too. And actually, I wrote an article called "Developers Are People Too" back in 2004. Programmers are people too, and this was about middleware, right? So why do developers and really highly technical folks need ease of use? It didn't make sense to most folks, but really they do in a lot of different ways. Things like command line interfaces and middleware and other aspects of more technical documentation and technical code can be made easier to use. So I teamed up with a developer to write this article back then. Actually, just a few weeks ago, I'm working with a team, or was working with a team that Alicia's working with now, and they create tools for other developers, right? So they're platform developers, and their tools are not used directly by end users. They're used by other developers. So I asked them, your users are developers. What do you need to know from them to make your job better, to make their lives easier? So we put together a survey and reached out to other developers who consume the tools that they use to understand what aspects of their code and the documentation they provide and the support they provide for the platform that they can improve to make their users' lives easier. So remember, developers and technologists are people as well. And then finally, from an empathy standpoint, so are your coworkers. Most of them are people as well. And we should be empathetic to our coworkers. Yeah, I think I have good people skills. What kind of idiot question is that? This is just kind of a plea for all of us to understand, we work in a stressful environment, and sometimes we spend more time with our coworkers than with our families in a lot of cases. So just be nice to each other, be kind and empathetic to each other, try to see things from each other's point of view. And that's all I got in terms of presentation. Here's a summary of the skills we talked about. And Chris, I'll stop now if you want, and then we can do questions later. And
Any questions for Carol?
I guess no questions. So we'll get Eric. Eric?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
In your many years of experience, we talked about...
Ooh, he just called you old.
Oh, shh.
He did.
I'm used to it.
We talked about
On you.
screen have you been able to identify a correlation between the soft skills that people have as they're moving upskill and how they develop those skills and those skills maybe change?
Yeah, they definitely do. I think there are different aspects of the field that appeal to folks as they grow in the field. I tend to see folks being a lot more hands-on at the beginning of their careers and then wanting to be more strategic and upstream as they get later on in the field, in their careers. That's just a generalization. It's not always true. I kind of bounce back and forth a lot. Yeah, well, that's me.
Don't you also feel like some people shift from business strategic to people? Like it's like, it seems like the higher up we go, it's like we either get really into what the user wants or what the business strategy is getting into.
And that's a lot of that upstream kind of stuff and moving up. But it does help us be more effective at a higher level. So.
Dude.
He won.
Yeah.
By asking a question.
Beautiful visualization.
Yeah, this couldn't come at a better time, actually.
I know. Anybody else?
Yeah.
A million hands.
Well, we got to cut me off though.
We're going to cut you off at some point.
Because I don't want to take Eric's time.
All right.
Okay.
Glad to see the 3x3 up there. One of the things that I don't like that I've seen over the last few years with Agile is that there seems to be this emphasis on, just get that wireframe done, just get the prototype done. So the idea of saying, well, I want to do 2, maybe 3 of these has been taken off the table, or at least it's pretty hard to make that happen. Do you have any comments on that and how we can make that comparative design happen?
Yeah, so we were talking about how challenging it is to integrate HCD and Agile. So one of the things we're doing now is try to figure out how to better size and estimate the efforts of HCD folks on projects so that we can say, all right, we don't know anything about this design. We need to do some research. We need to do a couple of iterations, maybe a couple of variations. That's going to take us 4 weeks. Developers, you're not going to pull this into the next sprint. You're going to wait 2 sprints to pull it in. So there's a heck of a lot of sizing, estimating, and planning behind HCD Agile to make it coordinate. Otherwise, you're going to be working against each other. And you're going to be always too late, right, because it takes too long. Well, if you can set the expectations, this is going to take 6 weeks. This is going to take 8 weeks. Just don't take that story yet. You don't have to take it right away. So there's a negotiation there, too, and there's learning on both sides. But yeah, that's a great question. We're always fighting against us being too slow, and that's always been that way.
Also, developers hate working on the same thing twice in 1 quarter. They just get really slow at it. It's like, we're on this form again?
Yeah.
I get it, totally. One more person, we're out of time. Oh, look, she did 2 hands.
I'll stick around later.
Okay.
We can
Of course, Carol's going to be here all night, so.
Okay.
tip your waiters.
Hi, so thank you for the presentation. I work for Express Scripts, which is a big enterprise, and I work as a technical product owner. I just want to shout out, I went through launch code. So anyone went through launch code here? Woo!
And go, girls.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. So at least the team I'm working with, we don't have a design. We don't have a UX designer in the team. So normally we have to schedule with a in-house design team, and of course they have a lot of stuff on their backlog, which often become a bottleneck. And is there any? And often when I talk to them, it seems like they don't quite know how to. I don't quite understand why they're doing things a certain way. You know, like why does it have to look like that? And why is it still so ugly after you designed it so many times? So any idea on when someone who's not in the UX design field work with those people and how we can work better?
Yeah, as I said, I'm a big process nerd, and I'm big on planning and estimating and sizing. I think it's really important to set the expectations about how much any one UX person can do. And a lot of times we wind up seeing one person being assigned to 10, 15, 20 projects. And the expectation is they're going to come in and sprinkle some UX dust and everything is going to be fine. So there is education at that, and that's why we were talking about the business understanding and communication. folks at that level have to understand what this skill really means and what it takes to do it in a way that's going to deliver results. So a lot of this comes from expectations that aren't properly set. So that would be the first thing. Another, I mean, an easy thing is just get a lot more resource, get a lot more people to come in and make the case for that. But it's an evolution. It takes a long time for large enterprises to kind of evolve to where they understand what the skill set is and what it's going to cost to actually work.
By the way, I got some UX dust. If anybody needs $20 at OZ later. Can we give it up, Carol?
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to take a like 6 to 8 minute break. Everybody, bio break, networking, whatever you want to do, and then we're going to have Eric come up and talk. There are soda.